At 7:42 a.m. on December 7, 1941, Second Lieutenant Charles Macdonald stood beside his P-40 Warhawk at Wheeler Field, Hawaii, staring south as a column of black smoke climbed into the morning sky above Pearl Harbor, 6 miles away. He already knew what it meant. The Pacific Fleet had just been shattered, and there was nothing he could do about it. Macdonald was 27 years old. He had been a fighter pilot for 2 years. He had never fired his guns in combat. The first Japanese strike had come an hour earlier. 183 aircraft, battleships burning at their moorings. 18 ships sunk or crippled. More than 2,000 Americans dead before breakfast. By the time Macdonald finally got airborne, the attack was over. 90 minutes after the last bombs fell, his Warhawk clawed into the sky. He flew patrol over Pearl Harbor for an hour and a half, circling smoke, fire, and wreckage. There were no enemy planes left to fight, only burning ships, drifting oil slicks, and men scrambling below. When he turned back toward Wheeler Field, the danger wasn't over. American gunners were jumpy, exhausted, and terrified. Naval batteries opened fire at anything moving in the sky. 5-inch guns, 40mm Bofors, 50 caliber machine guns. Tracers climbed toward him in thick streams. Macdonald dodged a wall of friendly fire just to land his own airplane. That morning ended one life and began another. The pilot who had spent 2 quiet years flying training missions over peaceful Hawaii now faced a war that would last 4 years. A war where most Pacific fighter pilots didn't survive their first 6 months. A war where Japanese Zero fighters could outclimb and outturn nearly every American aircraft. A war fought across thousands of miles of open ocean, where a single engine failure meant ditching at sea and hoping someone saw you go down. Macdonald stayed in Hawaii for the next 2 years. He trained new pilots, flew endless patrols, watched other squadrons ship out to combat zones while he remained behind. By early 1943, he had logged more than 1,000 flight hours. Still 0 combat missions. Still 0 kills. He was becoming one of the most experienced peacetime fighter pilots in the Pacific. That changed in June 1943. Macdonald shipped out to New Guinea with the 348th Fighter Group, flying P-47 Thunderbolts on transport escort missions, the most monotonous assignment in the theater. 3 months of flying lazy circles over cargo aircraft. No enemy contact. Not a single shot fired. Then General George Kenney noticed something. The 475th Fighter Group needed a new executive officer. They flew P-38 Lightnings, twin-engine, twin-boom fighters with forked tails, longer range, better climb, and higher speed than the P-47. They were seeing heavy combat every week. On October 1, 1943, Major Charles Macdonald arrived at Dobadura, New Guinea. The unit called itself Satan's Angels, the first all P-38 group in the 5th Air Force. Within 3 weeks, Macdonald would be an ace. Within 6 weeks, he would command the group. Within 20 months, he would prove that the quiet pilot who survived Pearl Harbor was one of the deadliest fighter leaders in the Pacific War. His first combat mission came the next day, October 2nd, a fighter sweep to Wewak. 50 P-38s. Macdonald flew in wing position, watching, learning. They ran into 15 Japanese fighters. The veterans shot down 3. Macdonald fired his guns for the first time in combat. He missed everything. He came home alive. That was enough for day 1. 3 weeks later, everything changed. October 25th, mission to Rabaul. Weather closed in, thick clouds, 0 visibility. Most P-38 squadrons turned back. Macdonald's flight pushed through. When they broke into clear air, they found 24 B-24 Liberators almost completely unescorted, and 60 Japanese Zero fighters diving from above. Macdonald had a choice: run or fight. 6 P-38s against 60 Zeros. He chose to fight. What happened in the next 11 minutes defined his entire war. His P-38 carried 4 50 caliber machine guns and 1 20mm cannon, about 15 seconds of sustained fire. The Zeros climbed faster, turned tighter, and carried cannons that could rip a lightning apart with one burst. But the P-38 had 2 advantages: speed and a dive, and all its firepower concentrated in the nose. Macdonald shoved his throttles forward and dove straight into the enemy formation. The Japanese pilots weren't expecting aggression from 6 fighters against 60. He fired a 2-second burst at 300 yards. Missed. The Zero broke right. Macdonald followed, pulled lead, fired again. The Zero's left wing tore away. The pilot never escaped. His first kill, 3 weeks after arriving in combat, at 29 years old. The fight raged for 11 minutes. Macdonald's flight slashed in and out of the bomber formation, stripping Zeros off the B-24's tails. The Japanese had numbers. The Americans had desperation. When the Zeros finally broke away, Macdonald counted his planes. 6 P-38s. All still flying. 2 bombers lost. Without him, half the formation would have died. He landed at Dobadura with 14 rounds left. 2 weeks later, November 9th, he shot down 2 more Zeros in 4 minutes over Alexishafen. 5 kills. He was an ace. The next morning, November 10th, 2 things happened. Macdonald was promoted to lieutenant colonel, and the 475th's commanding officer rotated home. General Kinney needed a replacement. He chose Charles Macdonald, the quiet pilot who had waited 2 years for combat, now commanding 120 men and 3 squadrons of P-38 Lightnings at 29 years old. The most aggressive fighter group in the Pacific now flew under his command, and the missions were about to get longer, farther, and deadlier than anything they had faced before. Most of the enemy fighters were Zeros, with a handful of Ki-61 Tonys mixed in. They were still climbing through 10,000 feet when Macdonald's forward sweep hit them. That was their first problem. The second was numbers. They were outnumbered 2-1. The fight lasted 6 minutes. When it was over, the 475th Fighter Group had destroyed 14 Japanese fighters without losing a single aircraft. Below them, the B-24s finished their work. 83 enemy planes destroyed on the ground. All 3 runways cratered and unusable. Hollandia was finished as a forward Japanese airbase. Macdonald landed back at Nadab with 41 gallons of fuel remaining. 11 minutes of flight time. The mission had taken exactly 7 hours and 9 minutes. Every pilot made it home. By the end of April, Hollandia had fallen. Japanese forces pulled back toward Biak. The 475th advanced again, first to Hollandia in May, then Wakda Island in June, then Biak in July. Each move brought them closer to the Philippines. Each move stretched their range farther than their aircraft had been designed to fly. Macdonald's victory total climbed, 13 kills by mid-June, 14 by the end of July, but personal scores no longer mattered to him. Keeping his pilots alive did. Since October, the 475th had lost 23 men. Most hadn't been shot down. They had run out of fuel over open water. They had pushed damaged engines too far trying to make it home. The P-38 Lightning was fast and lethal, but it wasn't efficient. The Allison engines weren't designed for extreme endurance. Run them hard, they overheated. Lean them too much, they quit. Every pilot had his own fuel-saving trick. Most of them didn't work. Macdonald needed something better. He needed someone who understood engines. Someone who understood fuel. Someone who could teach pilots how to fly 8-hour missions without destroying their aircraft. In late June 1944, that someone arrived at Hollandia. A tall civilian walked into the operations tent wearing a khaki uniform with no insignia. He carried a briefcase. He asked to see the group commander. Macdonald looked up from his desk. The man extended his hand. Charles Lindbergh, the first man to fly solo across the Atlantic. The most famous pilot in the world. And he wanted to fly combat missions with the 475th Fighter Group. Macdonald's first thought was that General Kinney had lost his mind. His second was that this civilian was going to get himself killed. His third was that maybe, just maybe, Lindbergh knew something that could save dozens of his pilots. He was right about the third thought, wrong about the second. Within 4 weeks, Lindbergh would double the operational range of the P-38. Lindbergh spent his first week observing. He flew practice sorties, studied engine gauges, asked questions, took notes. He noticed the problem immediately. Every pilot was flying at 2,300 revolutions per minute with 46 inches of manifold pressure, maximum continuous power. It was what training manuals taught. It was also destroying their range. On June 27th, Lindbergh flew his first combat patrol with Macdonald, a routine mission to Jeffman Island. For aircraft, Macdonald led. Lindbergh flew wing. When they landed, the other 3 pilots had 30 to 40 gallons remaining. Lindbergh had 90. Macdonald asked how. Lower the RPM to 1400, Lindbergh said. Increase manifold pressure to 30 inches. Same power. Half the fuel burn. The technique violated every rule in the P-38 manual. Engineers insisted it would destroy engines. Lindbergh said they were wrong. Macdonald tried it himself on the next mission, a 6-hour patrol to Sarmi. He landed with 70 gallons remaining. An extra hour of fuel. Enough to change everything. Within a week, Lindbergh was teaching the entire group. He stood in the briefing tent with charts showing RPM and manifold pressure combinations. Pilots were skeptical. Lower RPM meant less power. Everyone knew that. Lindbergh explained combustion efficiency, airflow, fuel ratios. He proved it in the air. Mission after mission, he returned with more fuel than pilots flying identical profiles. After 2 weeks, every pilot in the 475th was using his settings. After 3, they were planning missions that had been impossible a month earlier. Before Lindbergh, the P-38's combat radius was about 570 miles, 6 hours total. After Lindbergh, it jumped to 700 miles, 8 hours. Some pilots pushed it to 9. The P-38 Lightning had become a true long-range escort fighter. General Kinney heard about it in mid-July. He flew to Biak to see for himself. Lindbergh briefed him personally. Kinney ordered every P-38 group in the 5th Air Force to adopt the new settings immediately. Within 2 weeks, every Lightning pilot in the theater was flying Lindbergh's numbers. The strategic impact was immediate. Balikpapan's oil refineries on Borneo, 925 miles from Biak, had been unreachable by fighters. Bombers went in alone and paid for it. Now Macdonald's P-38s could escort them all the way to the target and back. 12 to 14 hours in the cockpit. But possible. Planning began in late September. First, staging through Morotai. Refuel. Launch at dawn. Escort B-24s to Balikpapan. Destroy the refineries. Japan's oil supply depended on that target. Without it, their war machine would choke. But before that mission ever flew, Lindbergh had one more patrol to fly with Macdonald. July 28th. What should have been a milk run? What became the day a civilian nearly got himself killed and nearly ended Macdonald's career with him. At 9:20 a.m., Macdonald led a 4-ship patrol near Sarmi Island. Lindbergh flew number 3. They were checking for shipping. No combat expected. At 9:40, they crossed the coast near Amahai airstrip. Intelligence reported no enemy activity. The field looked abandoned. Macdonald was about to turn for home when his number 4 called out 2 contacts low, heading east toward the water. Mitsubishi Ki-51 Sonya reconnaissance aircraft. 2-seat. Armed. Slow. Target practice. The first Sonya spotted them and dove for the deck, skimming 50 feet above the water. Macdonald led the dive. At 300 knots, the P-38s closed fast. The trailing aircraft opened fire. Missed. Then Lindbergh broke formation. He had spotted the second Sonya, coming straight at him. A head-on pass. Closing speed over 600 miles per hour. At 400 yards, both pilots opened fire. Tracers crossed in the air. At 200 yards, Lindbergh pulled up hard. The Sonya couldn't follow. Its controls were shredded. The aircraft stalled, rolled inverted, and slammed into the water at 200 knots. Captain Saburo Shimatada never escaped. Lindbergh had just scored his first, and only, aerial victory. A civilian technical representative had shot down a Japanese aircraft in combat. They landed back at Biak at 11:15. Ground crews noticed Lindbergh had more fuel than everyone else, as usual. They also noticed he was shaking when he climbed out. The head-on pass had rattled him. He was 52 years old. 3 days later, August 1st, Lindbergh flew again. Another milk run. Except it wasn't. At 10:20, they encountered P-38s from the 49th Fighter Group engaged with 3 Zeros near Palau. Macdonald moved in to assist. The Zeros broke in different directions. One climbed. One dove. The third vanished into cloud. Lindbergh tracked the low one. Then the third Zero dropped out of the clouds behind him. Dead astern. 300 yards. Closing fast. The Japanese pilot opened fire at 250 yards. 20mm shells walked up Lindbergh's left boom. One engine was trailing smoke. Macdonald saw it immediately. He was 400 yards out, too far for a clean deflection shot. The Zero was locked onto Lindbergh, closing from behind. Lindbergh never saw it. Macdonald pushed both throttles into emergency war power and rolled into a dive. The Japanese pilot was focused forward, intent on finishing his target. He never looked back. At 100 yards, Macdonald opened fire. A head-on pass. The P-38's nose-mounted guns hit as a single mass. The burst tore through the Zero's cockpit. The aircraft stalled, rolled, and fell straight into the ocean. Lindbergh limped back toward Biak on one engine. 32 miles. He landed with both hands locked on the controls. When he shut down, his left engine nacelle was scorched black. Another few seconds, and the fire would have reached the fuel tanks. That evening, General Paul Woodsmith flew in personally. He called Macdonald into his office. The conversation lasted 4 minutes. The charge was simple, allowing a national hero to be placed in unnecessary danger. Charles Lindbergh was a civilian. He was not authorized for combat. He was certainly not supposed to be getting shot at by Japanese fighters. Macdonald was given 1 month of punitive leave. Lindbergh departed the 475th the next morning. His combat flying was over. His fuel-saving techniques were not. Every P-38 pilot in the Pacific was now flying missions that had been impossible just weeks earlier. Macdonald spent August in Australia, forced rest while his group prepared for the largest operations of the war. When he returned in September, he would have 4 months to prove that saving Lindbergh's life had been worth the cost. He returned to the 475th on October 13, 1944. The group had moved to Morotai while he was gone. Preparations were already underway. Every pilot knew what was coming. The Philippines. MacArthur's promise. I shall return. The invasion began on October 20th. The 475th flew 6 missions that day. Macdonald led 4 of them: fighter sweeps over the beaches, ground attack runs, bomber escort. By October 24th, the advanced echelon was ashore. By October 26th, Macdonald was operating from Tacloban, a dirt strip hacked out of jungle. No concrete, no facilities, just fuel drums and ammunition crates. The P-38s took off from mud and landed in mud. But they were 300 miles closer to Japan. With Leyte secured, the strategic equation shifted. Targets once thought unreachable were suddenly vulnerable. Balikpapan topped the list. The oil refineries on Borneo, 925 miles from Biak, 750 from Morotai. Without them, Japan's fuel supply would collapse. 5th Air Force planned 5 major strikes. The 475th would provide escort. 12 to 14 hours in the cockpit. The longest fighter missions of the Pacific War. October 14th, the first Balikpapan raid. Macdonald led 36 P-38s staging through Morotai. They launched at 6:55, rendezvoused with 101 B-24s at 8:30, climbed to 18,000 feet, and set cruise power. 1,400 RPM. 30 inches of manifold pressure. Exactly what Lindbergh had taught them. They crossed 600 miles of open ocean, no emergency fields, no rescue coverage for most of the route. At 10:40, they reached Balikpapan. The refineries stretched along the coast, storage tanks, cracking plants, pipelines. The B-24s rolled into their bombing runs. Japanese fighters appeared at 11 o'clock. 43 Zeros and Oscars scrambling from nearby airfields. Macdonald's high cover engaged immediately. The fight scattered across 20 miles of sky. Lieutenant Joseph Forster shot down a Zeke, then took cannon fire in his left engine. Oil pressure dropped to 0. He feathered the prop and turned for home. 600 miles on one engine. Most pilots would have bailed out over land. Forster trusted Lindbergh's numbers. 7 hours later, he landed at Morotai with 11 gallons remaining. The 475th claimed 30 enemy fighters that day. They lost 3 P-38s. All 3 pilots were recovered by submarines. The bombers destroyed the Pandansari refinery and heavily damaged the Ejula plant. Japanese oil production at Balikpapan dropped 70% overnight. 3 more raids followed. October 18th, November 3rd, November 9th. Each time, Macdonald's P-38s flew 12-hour missions. Each time, they came home. By late November, Macdonald's victory total stood at 23. 13 kills in 7 weeks, most over the Philippines. But numbers weren't the story. The story was reach. The 475th was flying missions no other fighter group could touch, protecting bombers that would otherwise fly unescorted, covering ground forces that needed air support. All because one civilian had rewritten the rules of fuel management. December approached. Intelligence reported heavy Japanese reinforcements moving toward Ormoc Bay. MacArthur planned another landing. December 7th, 3 years to the day after Pearl Harbor. Macdonald would lead the air cover. But first came December 6th, the briefing that set everything in motion. At 5:30 on December 7th, 1944, Macdonald briefed 36 pilots at Tacloban. The mission was simple: continuous air cover over Ormoc Bay. Dawn to dusk, intelligence reported over 100 Japanese fighters within range. The enemy knew this landing would cut their supply lines. They would throw everything at it. Macdonald launched at 6:15. His aircraft, Put Maru, carried the number 100 on both booms. Group commander's plane. 13 months, 23 victories, not a scratch. At 7 o'clock they reached Ormoc Bay. The invasion fleet stretched along the coast. Macdonald set his patrol pattern. At 7:40, 12 Oscars dived from the north. 4 minutes later, 3 were burning. At 8:20, 15 Zeros appeared. Macdonald led the intercept himself. 2-second burst. 1 exploded. A second fell moments later. 25 victories. At 9 o'clock, 3 more fighters broke through toward the transports. Macdonald was too high. Too far. He dove straight down. 400 knots. 450. The airframe shuddered. At 4,000 feet, he pulled out. 4 GS, then 5. His vision tunneled. The fighters were lining up on a transport. Macdonald opened fire at 200 yards. 1 disintegrated. The others broke. He caught the second in a climbing turn. The guns fired. The aircraft came apart. 27 victories. He didn't know it yet. The day wasn't finished. The 475th flew 6 more missions over Ormoc Bay. They destroyed 27 enemy aircraft and lost 2 P-38s. Both pilots were recovered. The invasion succeeded. Japanese resistance in the Philippines began to collapse. 18 days later, Christmas morning, Macdonald led a fighter sweep over Clark Field. The Japanese launched everything they had left. Macdonald shot down 3 aircraft in a single mission. For the second time in less than 3 weeks. Macdonald received his second Distinguished Service Cross shortly afterward. January 1945 brought more missions. More victories. The 475th supported ground forces advancing toward Manila. By February, American troops controlled the capital. By March, organized Japanese resistance on Luzon had collapsed. On March 13th, Macdonald scored his final victory. A lone Japanese fighter over northern Luzon. His 27th. He never announced it. Never marked it as significant. The mission report listed it alongside 8 other victories that day. 1 more aircraft destroyed in a long column of numbers. In July 1945, Macdonald received orders to return to the United States. His combat tour was over. 20 months commanding the 475th Fighter Group. 27 confirmed victories. 2 Distinguished Service Crosses. Over 400 combat missions. He had begun the war watching Pearl Harbor burn. He was ending it as one of the most successful fighter commanders in the Pacific. But the number that mattered most to him was not his kill total. It was the pilots who made it home. Pilots who survived because they flew missions that should not have been possible. Because they managed fuel precisely. Because a civilian had rewritten the limits of the P-38, and Macdonald had enforced it across his group. On July 15th, Macdonald handed command to his executive officer. He flew Put Maru one last time, a farewell flight over Luzon. Then he climbed out of the cockpit, saluted his crew chief, and walked away from the aircraft that had carried him through 2 years of war without a single combat loss. What followed would define the rest of his life. The quiet ace who never sought recognition. The commander who led from the front. The officer who saved a national hero and paid the price. The war was ending. Macdonald's next chapter was beginning. Macdonald returned to Washington, D.C. in August 1945. The war in the Pacific ended while he was in transit. He had been 20 years old when Pearl Harbor was attacked. He was 30 when the war ended. 4 years spent preparing for combat. 20 months spent fighting it. The Army Air Forces assigned him as a legislative liaison to the House Armed Services Committee. A desk job, briefing congressmen on Pacific air operations, explaining budgets, testifying about aircraft procurement. Not flying. He hated every minute of it. He did it anyway. That was Macdonald. Quiet. Professional. He did what needed to be done. In 1949, he graduated from the Air War College at Maxwell Air Force Base. Command assignments followed: the 33rd Fighter Group, the 23rd Fighter Wing. In the 1950s, he served as an air attaché in Sweden. In the 1960s, he taught at the War College, training the next generation of fighter commanders. He retired as a colonel in 1966. 27 years of service. He started as a second lieutenant watching Pearl Harbor burn. He finished as a colonel who had helped win the Pacific War. He never wrote a memoir. Never toured speaking circuits. Never built a public legend. Other aces became famous: Richard Bong, Thomas Maguire. Macdonald went sailing. He bought a boat in Sweden and spent 5 years sailing the Pacific and Caribbean with his wife. In 1971, he closed his real estate business and sailed to Mexico. In 1973, they returned to San Diego and built a new boat. They sailed until his wife died in 1978. After that, Macdonald came ashore for good. He settled in Mobile, Alabama, the town where he had grown up. Few people knew he had been the third highest scoring ace in the Pacific. Fewer knew he had commanded the 475th for nearly 2 years. Almost no one knew he had saved Charles Lindbergh's life. But the techniques Lindbergh taught and Macdonald enforced lived on. Every P-38 pilot manual was updated. 1,400 revolutions per minute. 30 inches of manifold pressure. The numbers that doubled the Lightning's effective range. Thousands of pilots used them. Hundreds made it home who otherwise would not have. The 475th Fighter Group ended the war with 552 confirmed aerial victories, more than any other P-38 group in the Pacific. They flew missions to targets no one else could reach. Balikpapan, Clark Field, Formosa, all because fuel efficiency turned distance into advantage. Macdonald's aircraft, Put-Put Maru, survived the war. Today, it stands restored at the Lone Star Flight Museum in Galveston, Texas. Number 100 painted on both booms. 27 victory markers beneath the cockpit. Visitors can see the gun ports, the cockpit, the aircraft that carried him through 20 months of war without a single combat loss. Charles Macdonald died on March 3, 2002. He was 87 years old. Obituaries listed his victories, his decorations, his command. What they could not measure was his impact, the pilots he trained, the decisions he made, the lives saved by leadership that valued survival over glory. He was buried with full military honors. A flag-draped coffin, a 21-gun salute. Taps played over a cemetery in Alabama, far from the Pacific Islands where he fought, far from Pearl Harbor, where his war began. A quiet pilot, a commander who led from the front, a man who proved that leadership is not about personal victory counts. It is about bringing your people home alive. Charles Macdonald. Satan's Angels. Put-Put Maru.